Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Deeply Rooted podcast by Planting Roots. My name's Erin, and my co host Liz and I today have Nina Peebler on the podcast. We're jumping into another episode of the So There I Was series, where we get the opportunity to sit down with some awesome women in the military community and hear about their stories and where God has shown up in the midst of their military journey. So today we have Nina on the podcast. Nina, I originally got to know Nina through her husband, Dan. Dan was a year ahead of Liz and I at the academy, and he was really involved in our church group there. And he's an awesome musician who has, led a lot of people in worship. So that's how I originally got to know Nina, just again through Dan. But now I've had the pleasure of walking through motherhood alongside Nina. Our boys are about a month and a half apart, and Nina and her husband are currently in Washington State, which is where my family is. And so I've had a chance to kind of hang out with them and our boys together, which has been super fun. So Nina, welcome to the podcast. And if you wouldn't mind giving us just a brief introduction of who you are.
Yeah, hi guys. Thanks for having me. Like they said, I'm Nina. My husband Daniel, he's in the Coast Guard. We met in high school and dated throughout his time at the academy. And then whenever he graduated, we got married 10 days after. So, yeah, we've been doing this for a while now, almost 8 years this year. So, seen a lot of
It's
the
crazy.
military Coast Guard lifestyle. Moved to a lot of places. We're both originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, and then after we got married, we moved to Virginia for 2 years, and then we moved to Alaska last summer. We're there for 3 months, and then moved to Washington at the beginning of this year. So, yeah, just the crazy military life, following that up.
Our intro episode to this series was actually all about like our crazy moving stories from PCS season. So, the viewers have got a little bit of a taste of that. But now that we know a little bit more about who you are, Nina, we would love to hear more of your story. If you could tell us about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to just like talk about this past year, what it's brought us, because we've had a lot of changes in our life. I found out I was pregnant earlier last year around April, and then we moved. We PCSed in the summertime, so we took a month-long road trip across the United States from Virginia to Alaska. It was really fun. We got to see a bunch of our family and see a bunch of the United States. And then once we got to Alaska, I had my 20-week like anatomy scan for my pregnancy, and we found out that our son has some medical issues. He has a shunt in his liver, which just like diverts blood around his liver, and so we ended up having to watch that pretty closely throughout the pregnancy. And then we also found out that Ayers, our son, he had a 50% chance of having Down syndrome. And then at his birth, we discovered that that diagnosis is true. He does have Down syndrome. So this past like season has been just so many changes because of that. When we did our move to Alaska, because of the special needs diagnosis and the medical, they didn't allow us to continue living in Alaska and Juneau because there's no children's hospitals, no doctors that could adequately treat him. He would have to get flown out for any medical needs. And so they decided to move us to Washington. So for his birth and everything, we were temporarily living here in Airbnbs and in RV at some points and in hotels. So it's been a pretty big journey, and definitely have seen the work of God in every single aspect of it. And then the military has helped us a lot throughout this process too. I guess your guys' like theme for this episode is So There I Was. And so when I thought about that, I was thinking about how there we were in Alaska with no like family, no, brand new to the area, no real support system, but we got involved pretty quickly in one of our churches there, and we found a great community in that, and being able to rely on each other and other couples who were going through like pregnancy at the same time. So that was really nice. And then we've been really blessed with having our friends who are also like scattered throughout the United States, and having those to rely on, like Aaron and Nolan with their pregnancy. We were in like the same stages of it for a lot of it. And it was nice to have friends that were there with us through that.
Yeah, Nina, there's so much of well, there's so much I could dive into as far as like spiritual um strengths that I've seen you display. And I was really lucky to even though we weren't geographically close, the few texts that we were able to send back and forth like throughout our pregnancy, your faith never from outwardly anyway, never wavered. And through those scary diagnoses, um, your trust in the Lord, you're in Daniel's relationship, your strength as a united couple, those things stayed strong and were the backbone, I think, of the whole experience. And like you mentioned, you guys dated for so long. And when I was at the academy, that was always something that was so uplifting to me, just like your faithfulness to a spouse, soon to be spouse at that time, who was going through military life. And we have a lot of wives who listen. And I guess, do you have any insight for them of just like you're on the outside of the military journey. You're not necessarily active duty yourself, but you are so much a part of it. And it takes teamwork, togetherness, unity. Like I said, like that is marriage. And so do you have any like wisdom for either people who are not married and gonna be married and like trying to decide if that's a worthwhile endeavor, or people who are married and like, I mean myself, like it's a hard life. Like being married in the military, like they're busy, moving all the time, like, you don't always have that community like you mentioned, you have to find it, you have to seek it out. Do you have any wisdom or advice for that situation?
Yeah, it definitely helped that when Daniel and I first started dating, he knew he was gonna go to the academy and be in the Coast Guard, so it wasn't something that, like, was a surprise. It was, "Do you wanna date me even though I'm doing these things?" So, like, picking that lifestyle and choosing that, I knew God was leading me there, and, like, for some reason, growing up, I had envisioned being married to someone in the military. Like, I had dreams about it and, like, definitely felt the Lord speaking me in that way, which was weird because there's no one in my family who's in the military at all. And
Mm,
so it was like a big step for me. And then my parents were like, "Whoa, are you sure about this?" But I felt the Lord definitely leading me. And then throughout the long distance, some things that really helped us get through it is we like talked as much as we could. And, at the academy, that was really hard because you guys were constantly busy, like doing homework till like all nighters all the time. But we did these Bible journals with each other where we'd read a chapter of the Bible and then write like a journal page each night. And then whenever we'd see each other, we'd swap journals. So then we would go and read their journal and like what they had to say, and then the chapter of the Bible that they read. And so we'd like talk back and forth through that. And it definitely helped us because we were like not only like getting to know each other like through that, but we were also getting to know like how they saw God in the Bible, which was super cool and a really interesting way to like grow our faith when we're so far apart. Yeah. So that definitely helped. And then like being married, he was deployed for the first time because at the academy, like you guys were here the whole time. You weren't actually deployed. And for his first deployment, he could only do emails. So that's the only way we were able to talk. And that was definitely hard because I was in the hard parts of nursing school. So also equally exhausted and trying to get through that was difficult. But I'd say leaning into my faith and doing the journals that we did definitely helped because we kept doing them at that point.
mhm.
And then after that, I think the next patrol, he got to like talk on the phone more often. And then the one after that, he was able to video chat me every night. So just communication, I think, is like the key to holding on to those relationships and keeping those like the strongest you can. And even when communication is like the bare minimum, still using it to like the best ability you can definitely helped us.
Nina, it's so awesome to just hear like about the awesome things that have come through your military marriage and just the ways you've been able to get around the distance and the deployments. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about going through your son's diagnosis in marriage and like how that tested your marriage and also strengthened it and like how God used that to like bring you and Daniel closer together.
Yeah. So whenever we found out that my son could possibly have the diagnosis, like we were given the option to like it's called doing an amniocentesis where they like take some of your amniotic fluid and test to see if it's for sure that he has that. And we wrestled with, do we want to do this test or do we not want to do this test? Because the reason that they end up doing that test is to see like if you want to continue with the pregnancy. And we knew that we wanted to keep the pregnancy no matter what. And it was more of a, do we need this peace of mind or are we able to like just pray and like trust the Lord? That was like our end goal with that. And we decided against it, and it was definitely a test of faith just having that like what if in your brain like the whole time. And we ended up just really praying about it. We would pray like every night or like as much as we could together, and also apart because we were both like working separately. And I know them something that helped a lot with us is we started just praying like over the baby, and we would sing this song every night to him. It was "Lord, I Need You" by Matthew Moher, and it would just I don't know. I just like we would cry about it every night, basically, just having that like scary thought of like, what is this going to change for us, or like if it's not true, like is this stress all going to be for nothing? So definitely trusting the Lord through that is like the only way that helped us get through that. And then Daniel, he once we found out about diagnosis, he like told me that for some reason he had always felt that God was going to give him a son with Down syndrome. Like
Mhm.
it was something in the back of his head that was always there. And he didn't tell me about that at the time because he was like didn't want to scare me is what he told me, but in the end I felt like that was also just like God being there and just being like helping prepare him, and then he is the one who like Daniel helped really lead me in that season, just trusting the Lord with that.
Hmm. Last episode, Liz and well, I guess in our intro episode, I was kind of talking about the verse that delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. And just talking about it in the sense that like God will change your heart and prepare you. Like he will give you the desires. He will do the work of changing you if you delight in him. And so just what you were saying about Daniel there and uh, just how God works in general, I think he prepares us for things that we have no idea that he's preparing us for. And planting roots, their theme verse is Jeremiah 17:8, which is he is like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream and does not fear when he comes, for its leaves remain green and is not anxious in the year of drought, for it does not cease to bear fruit. And that verse, like when we remain like planted by water, when we remain in the word, when we, dwell on the things that are eternal, that are everlasting, that are going to get us through hard times. Like not everyone gets a tangible test like you have all the time. Like I think oftentimes we talk about it, we talk about being planted by streams of water, but not everybody all the time is walking through a season where it's really being tested. And I think what you're talking about, the song "Lord, I Need You," I love the song for one, and two, I think that honestly, sometimes when I've been in seasons where I've felt the desperation of "Lord, I need you," I feel closer to him than, like, when I am not walking through a trial necessarily. Because we all desperately, "Lord, I need you," desperately every single day. But I think it's, again, been cool to watch your faith flourish throughout this time because you have remained planted by streams of water. Um, and and yeah, God has just used you and he's going to use both of you in your son's life. And I mean, he's used you in my life as a mom too, just like strengthening my faith. And um, my son hasn't gone through much um, medical trial, but even like little things like he's wearing a helmet right now just for the shape of his head, like little things like that. It's like why would I fear? Like even though the world will tell you, oh, you need to be worried about this, and you need to look this up, and you need to try this, and like there's so many things that we feel like we can do to change the outcome of our lives, but really what we need to do is remain planted in the Word and remain planted in the Lord and in our community. So that's it's all just super uplifting to me, and I hope you know that I've really admired your faith throughout the whole thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see, what direction do you wanna take this now? So, again, back to the whole being planted idea with with being needing to be close to Seattle, that meant that you went from Virginia all across the country through your road trip to Alaska, like, super far, and then from Alaska to Washington, like, you've been opposite of rooted, I guess, this last year. And I mean, you grew up in one place your whole life. You grew up in Nevada, and now you're, a billion different places, which you expected joining the military, like joining the military community, but I don't know that you expected like so much change throughout this year. So how has that been, and how have you like stayed steady throughout it all?
Yeah, it's really funny when Daniel and I were doing premarital counseling before we got married. My biggest thing was I do not do well with change and that I need to prepare before I have change. And that is not how life goes. There's change constantly going on. So yeah, it was a huge change to just move to two different states in like less than a year of each other. So yeah, we did the whole move and everything. We got to Alaska. It was a dream. I love Alaska. I could live there for the rest of my life. But like we said, God had different plans. And it's funny because I had talked about like Seattle, and I was like, I don't think I ever like want to live in Seattle like ever in my life. And then this is where we ended up.
Hmm.
But it just I feel like shows like how the Lord just knows what you need without you need like saying it. Like I could never have thought that we'd end up here. And here we are, and in our situation that we're in. And even though it's been so crazy, and I feel like we haven't gotten to rest, and like we're finally getting to that point where it's like, oh, okay, I feel like we might be able to rest. It's been hard, but definitely like we could see the Lord the whole time through it. And even the times where it felt like change was gonna like be like the rest of our lives. Like when we were living in an RV with a newborn and we had like this much space to move around. Daniel just he did really good job with reminding me like this is temporary. Like the Lord is putting us where we need to be. We just have to trust Him, and definitely just a season of prayer and trust and just relying on God is what this season was. And it is really nice to finally feel like we're getting a little bit rooted into our new place.
Hmm.
And we're also have found a really great church family recently that we're becoming a part of, and they're like welcoming us in, and it's been nice to find a spot finally.
I feel like the Lord always uses change to turn us back to Him and rely on Him. Because whenever we're in the same environment for a long period of time, I feel like we can get comfortable, and when we're comfortable, we don't rely on the Lord as much as we should. And I just have seen so many like new moms walk through this sort of change, like change in their daily routine, change in their relationships with other people, um, change in their relationship with God. Like I've seen Erin walk through it, but I've also seen her walk through it with like such a newfound purpose in being a mom. And it's like it makes me excited to be a mom. And I think it's really encouraging to other women out there as well. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how your life has changed since you had a baby, like how your relationship with God has changed, and but also how you have like a new purpose in life being a mom.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like now I can actually focus on being a mom because the first 5 months, my son he had a feeding tube through his nose, and so I was more like in nurse mode for most of my time, and it was like just focusing on feeding him and making sure he's gaining weight and doing all of the things that were medically necessary to him. And then he's had the feeding tube out for a little over 2 months now. And so I finally feel like I'm getting to that, like, oh, like we can find a schedule and I can go and take him on little mom dates and not worry about, like, oh, do I have all the supplies to feed him? Or are we going to have like him pull out his NG tube and worry about that? So it's been really nice to like finally start figuring out, like, how am I going to do things as a mom? And it just has been a blessing that I get to do that with him because a lot of it was really scary at the beginning. So the change of going into motherhood was scary at first, especially just because of everything. But now that he's doing so much better, it's just so sweet to see those little moments where I'm like, oh my goodness, like he's my son and this is gonna be the rest of my life with him. Like when he tries new foods and when he starts saying mama and stuff like that, it's really the best thing ever. And I'm so thankful that we get to do that with him.
There's been moments with Weston that like I like sit back and I realize like, oh, wait a minute, like he's mine. Like he came out of me, and like I'm gonna be his mom forever. Like sometimes I don't even believe it myself, and I'm thankful that the Lord, like, meets us, like, when it's His will for us to do something, like, He meets us there, and He provides, like, the strength to get through it. Because I had no idea what I was doing, like, I mean, most new moms think that they do, but then, you know, realize that they need the Lord's guidance. And then another thing, like on that note, like the world will try to offer you so much guidance. And I know that like you, um, like when first hearing like the potential, like you talked about, like they wanted to do that or they offered that test because a lot of people, unfortunately, and it's devastating, might decide to like end a pregnancy because of something like that. And I just wanted to talk about like the what the world says and what the world advises, both with like things like that, and then also with like the way that you raise your kid, or like with Down syndrome specifically, like there's an image placed on them that like doesn't have to be there. Like I've also found like your strength in that aspect of like denying what the world says and really embracing the Lord's truth to be super uplifting. So if you wanted to talk about that, I would love it.
Yeah, definitely. With the Down syndrome diagnosis, I feel like they automatically put your kid in a box and they say like, "Oh, he's not going to reach this milestone. He's not going to be able to do this." But really, like these type of kids are able to do anything and everything a typical kid can do. And the fact that the world sees them as someone who like can be separated and not like included with everyone, it just breaks my heart because they deserve a spot in this world just as much as any person. And so, yeah, it's been really a journey to try and figure out like, oh, okay, so they say he's not going to meet this milestone and then he meets it. He's been meeting a lot of them, which is really great and such a blessing. And so it's just interesting how even from like the moment that they find out if there's a diagnosis, it was the whole thing got changed. Our whole plan for pregnancy, the delivery, all of that. And I've met a lot of moms who have kids with Down syndrome, and I've been blessed with churches that have programs for parents with kids with special needs, and getting to hear their stories and how their kids are and how they're like beating everything that the world has said about them essentially and what doctors have said has been so amazing. And I know that when I'm raising him and like throughout the time that I get to spend with him, I'm going to make sure that he has every opportunity that a typical kid cat has, and that people will try and see Down syndrome as something that doesn't need to be like looked down upon, but like that they'll like include him in everything and that he gets to be a part of the world just as much as anybody else does because they definitely deserve it. And I feel like God has them here for a purpose, and that purpose is just as important, if not more important, to like be a light to other people. Because every other child that I've met who also has Down syndrome is the happiest, the best child ever. Like they're so sweet. You talk to them and they just are having the best time. And it's so great to like get to see that example, especially because before like finding out about the Down syndrome diagnosis and like growing up, I hadn't really met anyone with like a kid with Down syndrome. And so getting to see that now and how like they're just a normal child, like that's how it is and how they need to be treated is really special. So I'm really thankful that I found so many churches in this area and like parent groups who also have kids with Down syndrome and are just there to support you and help you.
Eris is so blessed to be born into a family that loves him and cares about him and is going to believe in him and just, like, treat him, like, as he should be treated. I remember my cousin has Down syndrome, and she was just our cousin, like, we just spent time with her as she was our cousin, like, that's what she was to us, and I think it is so important to not label somebody as something, like, they're a child of God, we're all a child of God, and that is what our identity is rooted in, so I think it's so awesome that you guys are going to feed that into your baby and into your child, and, there was also a girl with Down syndrome at Matt and I's last church, and she was so amazing, and just watching her, like, praise the Lord would, like, bring me to tears every Sunday because of the joy that she had, and it's just, like, they have such a purpose here on earth, same as everybody else does, and it's, like, so beautiful to get to know them and just get to know them as people, and so I'm just so thankful that, you and Dan are Air's parents, and I wanted to talk about, if you could go back and give yourself some advice as you're pregnant and getting this diagnosis, or give advice to somebody who's walking through the same thing or walking through some health scares, with their baby, like, what advice would you give them, and, like, what encouraged you in that season?
Um, I would say, I mean, I know it's like basic, but like God's got you is
Mm.
like what I would tell them. I know like in those moments it does not feel like that. It feels like you're the furthest like you could get. And especially in like those times where it's just like I had days where it would just be the whole day. I would just cry. And I'd be folding his little baby clothes and like, is he gonna make it? Is like, am I gonna be able to bring my baby home? That was really hard time for us. And I know that when I was feeling that way, I would put on worship music and I would just sit there and I would just worship God because that's
Mm.
the only thing you can do in the moment. You can't physically do anything. You can't fix it. No one can fix it. You just have to trust and just rely that no matter what's going on, he's got it. And sorry. And yeah, I would just have a little quiet moment with God and I would know and be like, okay, we had our moment and now we're just going to keep going because that's all that you could do in those moments.
Oh, you're making me cry too. Well, and I'm also just thinking about Dan's song, which I don't mean to shout it out because like that's not necessarily the intent here, but Dan Joseph, everybody, he has a song called Doctor Says, and I mean I think he posted it like before, like a while before Weston was born, and again, like my son, we didn't have any scares during pregnancy, but still, it's like some of those lines in that song, like I'm gonna love you no matter what the doctor says, like they're a gift from above, and, like, my life is better simply because he is in it, and it has nothing to do with, like, what he does. Like, my son right now is not, like, doing anything for me, and I think it just paints such a picture of God's love for us. Like, we are doing nothing for God. Like, we are doing absolutely, the only thing that we bring to the table is our sin, right? I mean, that was we talked about that in our last, like, study of, like, the only thing that we bring to the table is our sin, and God is so gracious and so loving to sweep us up off the floor, broken and in shattered pieces, and to love us anyway. And it just, like, everyone go listen to that song. It'll make you cry, and but it'll also make you just so grateful for the Lord and that we have community and that we get to experience God's love here on earth. So, Nina, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for sharing your story. Are there any last words that you want to leave with everybody?
Um, I have a Bible verse that I wanted to read.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's Psalm 139:13, and it's you made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. And I just reflected on that a lot when I was pregnant because I knew that God was making this child and that no matter what, like it was gonna be something good. It was gonna be for a purpose and that no matter what happened, I could just rely that God's hand was at work in all of it. And so I just want to reflect that we are all made by God and we are knit together just for the purpose of loving God and loving others. And so, yeah, that's all I have.
Oh, this is awesome. Thank you, Nina, so much. And thank you all for listening. I hope that you were encouraged as much as Liz and I were from this podcast. And with that, I'm Erin,
And I'm Liz.
and we pray you stay deeply rooted.